Peace. My name is Brother Reggie Mabry. I am an independent researcher. I am reactivating my channel to talk about some things about Africa, particularly ancient Africa, West Africa, about black politics, and other issues that may come my way that I want to talk about. The title of this particular presentation is really a part one. Uh, the title is Mr. Jabari Osaze's description of the Tmhw is wrong, it's pseudo, and it's bordering on plagiarism. You, the audience, you should decide. For at least 6 years, Mr. Jabari Osaze has flooded internet with notions of what the Tmhw is. He has called both ancient and modern peoples the Tmhw. He has done this without any references to the Tmhw except for what he says it is. He calls himself a historian, and he does have a well-earned degree from Cornell University. He also calls himself a high priest. We're going to talk more about that in the next video. Of the many years that I've known him, more than probably 20 years, in the last 3 years or so, he has become even more difficult to challenge. He doesn't take challenges to his information well at all. Mr. Osaze's following is very large. He's on many channels and many groups of people support him, and I understand that. And I find that they are supporting him over by his personality and his ability to his debate abilities, but very few people are successfully able to challenge him on his information. And I've debated him twice. I am no longer going to debate him. Not that I don't think that I could prevail. I think that his information lately is really not worth debating. You're going to find out some aspects of why I think so. So my problem is once you are spiritually connected and then you connect with history, then there are some big problems, because then the person who does that have to mesh both things, and that is where a major problem comes from. So I am going to critique not just his information, but information of others when I think it's wrong or pseudo or bordering on plagiarism, and especially when it's inaccurate. So, part of this recent issue began maybe about 4 months ago when he said that my analysis on an ancient Egyptian cultural and spiritual concept of Ba Naka was poor. And in the recent video, he doubled down on that, again saying that I make poor arguments. He has a right to say that. No one is beyond critique, but we have to test if it is true. So what I am going to do, concepts of the Tmhw, and he has flooded the internet with it. It is wrong, it is pseudo, and it's bordering on plagiarism, and we have an obligation to scholarship to our communities to get notions like this out of our community. So I'm up to the task to do this. So now, until Mr. Jabari Osaze presents both a paper on the Tmhw and a sincere apology for the misinformation to the public if he cannot substantiate his ideas in a paper, this video is going to stay up. And I understand his followers and his supporters are going to be upset. And they will continue to say things what they've always said, that I am hateful and I am jealous. I am talking about the information. And if you think that talking about the information, especially when it's wrong, pseudo, and bordering on plagiarism, is wrong, then what you're doing is you're worshiping a personality. So, and this is problematic because Mr. Jabari is both a spiritual leader and both a historian. So that means he has to be correct. And because spiritual people seem to be able to tap into some inner secrets that mere mortals like myself cannot tap into. Well, I see that this is falling terribly apart when his spiritual information about the Tmhw and his historical information about the Tmhw is inaccurate. So, what I am going to do is I am going to outline some of the things that I want to talk about in this particular video. In my opinion, Mr. Jabari Osaze's view of the Tmhw damages the African story. Mr. Osaze is seemingly a Kemetic centrist, not African centric, but Kemetic centrist, meaning that his knowledge base and his worldview revolves around Kemet, which is a name of the civilization of Egypt beginning in a particular time, not all of the periods of ancient Egypt. Some of the early periods, we know that the name was Tawi, the two lands, Tmhw, the residence, and during the 11th and 12th dynasty, the civilization renamed itself, renewed itself with the name of Kemet and Tmhw as a place name, and then the peoples renewed themselves, and you hear names like the Tmhw. And we know this from the UNESCO conference of 1974 with Dr. Theophilo Benga, led by Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, the UNESCO symposium. Well, what Mr. Jabari's Kemet-centric view does in his attack against the Tmhw, it destroys the African story because he demonizes the Tmhw as if they were some light-skinned, admixed invaders or opposition to his beloved ancient Egypt. Now, all of us love Tawi, the two lands, as a civilization. It is one of the greatest civilizations of its time, and the world has benefited not just from the civilization of Tawi, the True Lands, but has benefited from the parents of that civilization, and the Tmhw and the Nubians, so-called Nubians, are important neighbors that have their own greatness. But what Mr. Jabari Osaze has done has demonized the Tmhw, and so many people would not even study them. And we're going to get into the origins of the, where the demonization comes from. So, by him doing that, we can't see the positive relationships of the Egypt's southern neighbors, the so-called Nubians, with the Tmhw, and we can't see the relationships of the northern part of the Tmhw, and we're not able to understand that the Tmhw civilization with their neighbors bordered on the western desert. They did most of their most of the civilization, their culture and civilization is on the western desert, and they themselves had basically two lands, a northern and a southern component. And because we can't, we have been blinded by stopping and not looking at the Tmhw and their two lands, their northern and southern components, we have not been able to see some important dynamics that where what we call ancient Egypt was isolate up and down the Nile Valley and going sometimes in the Levant. We don't see that it was in fact the Tmhw civilizations that spread westward. And that becomes really important. And they were an African civilization that had mixed components, just like ancient Egypt at times. But where did the Tmhw culture begin? Well, if the person researched, and if you research, you will see that the Tmhw is basically very similar to the C group Nubians, but actually very, very earlier. And you would see that the lands that the Tmhw actually inhabited were some of the great areas of ancient Egypt. I mean, of the regions, excuse me, around places such as the beloved Nabta Playa and Nabta Kasili, and you would see them around the Abu Balas Trail. That wasn't Egyptian. That was the Tmhw and their northern and southern components. And if there was ever a migration out of the Nile Valley during various times, it could only have been assisted by the Tmhw peoples with their neighbors and what the Tmhw knew about the lands of the Western Desert. We also, we also miss from his demonizing of the Tmhw that a good look at the northern region. So the Tmhw descendants, the Garamatis, the Numidians, right? We don't see the relationship of the Tmhw with these people at all through his very narrow and poor research. And certainly we don't see the relationship between the Tmhw and their Cushitic relationships during the South, as they also spread around the Wadi Howar and the titularies leading to Chad. the the transregional connections of Africa um, were with the neighbors of ancient Egypt because ancient Egypt or Tawi was isolate up and down the Nile and bordering into the Levant and going some places in the Western Desert. But the bulk of the movement of Africa and transregionally was through the peoples like the Tmhw. Now it's easy to miss that when miss that part of the African story when you have a person who is very voiceful on these platforms, demonizing the Tmhw. So at some point, maybe in another episode when the people are ready, we will unpack Dr. Salim Faraji's great new piece on the tumuli, the story of the tumuli, the burials, all throughout Africa, into the Nile Valley and into Kish, right? And we will unpack UNESCO's paper. UNESCO did a paper on Libya, and it will verify lots of things that I am going to tease out in this video. I don't want to make it too long, more than an hour and a half, because it will take an hour and a half to just to begin to undo the damage that Mr. Jabari Osaze has done. So when he says he calls Europeans Tmhw, that is wrong, it is pseudo, and it's bordering on plagiarism from Dr. Gerald Massey, and maybe even some things that Champollion said. But nevertheless, he has never, ever, ever sourced where he got those notions from. He destroys the African story again of the great North Africans and their descendants, the Libyans, who what do they want to call the Libyans that became the kings of Egypt. The Berbers, again, the Garamantes, the Numidians, the pyramids that are in northern Africa. It doesn't, the Tmhw in that desert regions are children of the parent people of the Green Sahara, and they are ancient. They didn't pop up. They didn't just pop up. They were there. They have many complexions, again, like the ancient Egyptians had complexions, because Africa is a diverse place. So we must repair what Mr. Jabari Osaze said about the Tmhw, and now without a paper, right, from him, then until he writes a paper, and if he does write a paper, he will find how inaccurate he was. And again, to classify Europeans as Tmhw or some European blood is terrible for our people, our young people particularly, and the African story. Like, for instance, calling Dr. Richard Carrier, and you know, I had criticized Dr. Richard Carrier not because of his general great work, which I think is really, really good, well cited, well researched work. I only criticized him because he had attacked Jabari Osaze's views on ancient Egypt, but didn't bring up the similar white counterparts. And I thought that that was problematic, because he chose to attack Jabari Osaze's without broadening to this belief system that others carry. But calling Dr. Richard Carrier a Tmhw, it's wrong. He's not a Tmhw. He's not related to Africa direct. He's not a direct descendant. So how do you call people names that have no relationship to Africa? That is bordering on bias issues. If you want to be biased, talk about uh, how groups of people uh, called that will be called the Europeans control the information, the primaries, and continuously mislead, disrupt Africa, control the nomenclature of Africa, right? Control the education and stifle our sovereign right to know ourselves and to get power and put them in their proper category. It hurts us when we make simple arguments against them because they control the laws, they control power, they control governments, and when we make simplistic arguments, we lose in court, we get kicked out of universities, we don't get awarded our degrees, and then we're labeled as blackologists and Afrocentrists and things like that, when in fact, in many times we are correct. We just have to make the arguments better, and we need to be able to interact with these people because they control the primaries. So this video is going to begin to examine the Tmhw, but know that they had two lands, northern and southern, and know that they are responsible for the bridge between the Great Nile Valley civilizations and the western, both on the northern side and on the southern side, and know that they also use cattle like the Nubians. Know also that they had a language that has affinities with Nubia, right, and the Nile Valley. Know that they were not isolate people. Know that they're not white people, European, though some areas of them were more admixed. Know that they became the Berbers and the Garamantes and the Numidians in other times, and know that they were really the caretakers of some of the great places like Kassili and Nabta Playa, and that they are part of the story of great African civilizations. So, Mr. Jabari has not shown any research on the Tmhw, and it's too late because he's just talked about it. So I'm going to begin talking about some aspects of even the relationships between the Tmhw and the other groups of people, and some of the things that I think that you should know. And maybe this is part one of the Tmhw conversation, and it is part one of me examining Mr. Jabari's history information. My next video will be examining some aspects of his spiritual information. I mean, in a recent video, you should know, he told me that he is not a priest of the Methodological. He was hiding behind Sarnetta's questions and he lost himself. The Methodological, the definition of it is the sacred word, the words of the divine, God's words. The Methodological is also a writing system. The formal writing system, and hieratic is a form of the Methodological, such as Demotic is a form of the Methodological, and then later late Egyptian, and then later Coptic, right, is a form of the Methodological writing system, the scripts. But they are all scripts of the divine. So, Mr. Jabari Osaze, if you're not a priest of the Methodological, then what type of priest are you? Not being nasty is something that you put out in the public. You either fix it or apologize or just move on. But I will tell you something. My next video is going to deal exactly with what you said, and you said it 3 times, so it must be true. You are not a priest of the Methodological. You never said that you was a priest of the Methodological. So that's the other part. So let's get into this. Now, look, I find that spiritual people think that they are correct in all areas without any repeatable expertise on this subject. And what they say is designed to fool people into thinking that they can do something that other people can't. I want to show where spiritual superpowers go horribly wrong, and everything that Mr. Jabari Osaze says must be checked. This includes his spiritual teachings and his secular teachings. In this presentation, I'm only going to deal with his secular teachings on the Tmhw because he's a historian. In the second video, I am going to challenge some of his spiritual teachings to the public. Well, what I found out is that Mr. Jabari Osaze, and I've known him for a number of years, have become more difficult to address and correct. These are in the later years. Now, so this presentation is about what, again, I am going to check and correct. So, a long time ago, Dr. Malachi York, in his spiritual teachings and cultural teachings, both, began to call the Europeans Tmhw. And we first heard it there, and that movement came and went. But Mr. Chuck Morgan of Nwapiism.com had addressed it. He addressed it for Dr. York, and somehow I think that people have forgotten that whole point. And so when Mr. Osaze began to talk maybe about 6 or 7 years on the subject, we forgot what Mr. or brother Chuck Morgan sourced for us. So, Mr. Chuck Morgan in Gerald Massey's Book of the Beginnings rendered this: Egypt, from Gerald Massey. The Egyptians identify themselves on the monuments as the Rut. A pictorial representation is found on the tomb of Seti I of 4 races of people arranged in groups of 4 men each. These are the Nasi Negroes. The Tmhw men of a light brown hue with blue eyes and hair in a bag. The Tamahu, who are fair as Europeans, and the Rut, who are Egyptians. These are typical groups not meant merely for conquered races, as may be gathered from the signification of their names. The Tamahu are light-complexioned people. In Egyptian, Tama means people and created, who is white, light, ivory. The Tamahu are the created white people. Na is black ink. Ne is a blackbird. Su is a person of birth. The Nasu, one black born, or in Egyptian phrase, black from the egg, Su. Him is the rudder to paddle fish. Hemi to steer. The Hemos thus indicated, or the sailors, seafarers, the people of the isles. The isles of the Gentiles, Gen X, might be rendered in Egyptian by the isles of the Amu or Hemu. The hieroglyphic hem is the sign of a water frontier. Well, I didn't write these sentences. Gerald Massey wrote these sentences. Now, the correct term of groups of people who they deem as Nubians, or the Nahisi, not the Nasi, right? The Nahisi. The Nahisi are groups of another culture outside of what we call ancient Egypt. He says the Hemo, men of a light brown hue with blue eyes and hair in a bag, right? He is really talking about the Amu people, the Amorites, another culture that is outside of Africa that the Nile Valley Africans saw as their neighbors, but were always on guard of these groups of people. And they have several descendant types of people, or related people, the Cadians and the Canaanites. Now, the Tamahu, who are fair as Europeans, and the Rut, who are Egyptians. Okay, so this is where we get the term that the Tamahu are fair as Europeans. And he says the Rut, who are Egyptians. Well, the ancient people of Tawi, the two lands, Shmai Tawi, the United Lands, they call themselves not the Rut, but the Remet. I just want to let you know, right? And he makes another big emphasis. He says that these are typical groups not meant merely for conquered races, as may be gathered from the signification of their names. The Tamahu are light complexion people. In Egyptian, Tama means people and created. He might be trying to use the word Tem, but he's using it wrong. Who is white, light, ivory. The actual term that the ancient Egyptians use is hedge, so it's not who. So the Tamahu are the created white people. And then he goes on with other negative pejorative terms. Na is black ink, Ne a blackbird, Su is a person of birth. All of this is wrong, scholarly. He's using lots of racist type descriptions. He's calling these groups of people conquered races. This is Dr. Gerald Massey. He is in the ASCAN of history. He is from another time period where the European world used scientific racism and classifications. However, Mr. Jabari Osaze uses parts of this to classify peoples who are non-Egyptian, ancient Egyptian, fair-skinned, right, lighter invaders, and he has now pushed it to represent people of European descent. Is this pseudo? Is this correct? Or is this pseudo and plagiarism? Because he has not ever cited Massey as Dr. Gerald Massey as the point and reference. And it is damaging because Gerald Massey was using it for racist reasons, and now Mr. Jabari Osaze, who has a prestigious degree, uses a word coined from a period of time of scientific racism to now flood the internet with this term. This is why our work gets a bad name. So, mm, so Brother Chuck Morgan did us a great service by pointing this out when Dr. York was using it. And I suspect that Jabari Osase's high priest, even though he's a priest, but his high priest used it in the teachings that Mr. Osaze got and never borrowed to look up the source while he has spread this stuff through the internet. So I am going to spend a little time trying to fix this and re-educate our people and re-educate others and to protect our people from being criticized by scholars for this type of terminology, as they call us blackologists and Afrocentrists and things like that. And this would be a good case for them to do it. So thank you, Mr. Jabari Osaze, and whoever you got this from. So let's correct it. Um, from Wikipedia, there is a hieroglyphic map of Tawi, ancient Egypt. And most people believe that the Tamahu people are in Libya. And they are the lighter skinned admixed Libyans. That's what most people believe. Because they don't study the the maps, the topology, the history of Africa. And I question Mr. Jabari Osaze, who is a historian, for not doing it. Because if you look at the map, there's a figure on your far left, and it is described in Wikipedia as Tamahu. And this map is a great map in Wikipedia because it shows the Nile Valley by the names that the ancient Egyptians gave them in the Methodological. So on the left side, you see a figure with a side lock, with tattoos, with a brown skinned. He has a beard, but Mr. Jabari Osaze wears a beard. He doesn't have a side lock. But this person has scarifications, tattoos. And he is called a Tmhw. But where is the land or the people of the Tmhw? Well, they are in the Western Desert. They exist in the Western Desert, and then later in time, because the civilization of Egypt had boundaries, maybe these people moved to what we call Libya outside of Egypt. And so let's say that these peoples are peoples outside of ancient Egypt. But what is their relationship to what we call ancient Egypt or Tawi? What is their relationship? Well, they here in the Western Desert are very, very close to important places in ancient Egypt. And let's see if in my next slide, I talk about this. Yeah, I do. So, on the top is the map portion that I want to talk about, that I'm talking about. On the right side is a description of a Tmhw, of the Tmhw from other sources. Now, the Tmhw, or peoples again, in this depiction, they not only have a side lock, they also have feathers in their hair, and they have scarifications or tattoos. And if you look very closely at the tattoos, they are very closely related to the ancient Egyptian language called the Medu-Neter. So they seem to be speakers of the Medu-Neter by their tribal tattoos, right? Now, interestingly, um, in this depiction, they are light brown. Well, the palette of African people have from yellow to very, very dark brown that we see as black. African people are the most diverse people of of the planet on the continent because of their shades of color, right? And that they are the progenitors of the human race itself, all of us. But interestingly, they seem to have directly an African culture. They are Africans. The notions that they are Europeans is strictly with Dr. Gerald Massey. Europe was not, their civilizations did not arise at this particular period of time. Now, again, from the map, the Tmhw are in close proximity of the foundation sites of Tawi in ancient Egypt. The founding king of the United Two Lands, or Shmai Tawi, reigned from Abju or Abydos, and Tennis or Thiz was a sacred site for these people in the area, in the peoples of what we call Tawi, ancient Egypt, Kemet. The question is, why and how did some white race live so close to what is called ancient Nubia? And what was their relationship? Now, Mr. Jabari Osaze may get his ideas about the Tmhw if he's doing, from the Tmhw or the Chinnu peoples, which is later described in the Ramses III table of nations. How even if the area of the Tmhw, the Tmhw, right, which he calls now Tmhw in Libya, was admixed by lighter skinned Africans connecting to Canaanites and other groups of people that was in that region, right? They are still African. Does From the diagrams, does it mean, or from the pictures, does it mean that all of the Chinnu or the Tamahu look like this? From just the few artifacts that we have. Well, we have other artifacts. I'm going to show you the picture of what is called the Black Mummy, right? We know that these people are African, and there were migrating Africans from the time period of the Green Sahara, and we know that the populations did mix, but the majority of the population is an African stock and an African culture from uh, from the earliest times. We know that the earliest Homo sapiens sapiens skeleton that we have is in Morocco, right? Uh, so where Mr. Jabari Osaze gets the notion that these are Europeans, and you can call Europeans Tmhw, and you can call people outside of the Nile Valley Tmhw. What kind of scholarship is that? What type of scholarship? He comes from a great university, right? My son attends that university, right? Um, my son attends that university. He's in a doctorate program. It's a great university. I'm happy to have our people be able to attend that university. But what type of scholarship will allow him, not sourcing where he gets his notions from, to spread this? And this gives our people a bad name in scholarship. Now, to further investigate both the Tmhw or Tmhw and the Tmhw, I would suggest that you read Manu Ampin's blog, which I've listed, and review the video on Smash Rockwell's show on YouTube called Racism in Egyptology, Black Egypt Who is Lying. And that show was done by several members of our community. Uh, Jonathan Owens himself, that's Smash Rockwell, Ujau of Sesh Medunecher, Anka Keck, Ankh West, Bobby Banga. These are names that we know them by in social media of real black atheists on fire. Shout out to them, and pseudo killers. And I believe that I was on that show also. Not presenting, just participating. It's interesting that Mr. Jabari Osaze, on the shows where we're actually looking at the Medu meaning the hieroglyphs, translating, sourcing, he's never a part of that. He's simply not a part of those type of discussions. He is an isolate, right? And in this case, his isolation has worked against him, right? And now he is going to have to defend the serious error by himself. And so for so long, it's been gone unchecked because, listen, some of our big channels, famous one, Black News 102, Sinetta Studios, there are things that I can do there, and I love the channel, and I've spent a lot of time on the channel, but there are certain things that I cannot do on that channel. And one thing is to correct Mr. Osaze. And so in the second video, you will see on that channel how I'm trying to talk and correct and discuss with Mr. Osaze, and you are going to see how that goes wrong for me. So I could have put this video on some of the other channels, but Mr. Osaze and brother Garfield Reed is going to have a debate, and that would kind of cloud the issue, and then people would say that I am destroying that debate and things that's untrue, because Mr. Garfield Reed is a very, very, very good young scholar, and he is going to debate Mr. Osaze because Mr. Osaze says that Christianity stole from ancient Egypt its philosophy to build Christianity. And that is going to be a very exciting debate. It was postponed I was blamed for it being postponed, um, but and Brother Garfield Reed was blamed um, for uh, uh, for the debate, and Mr. Jabari Osaze said that we called them names, but I don't call him names. I just check his information. But at any rate, we will see that debate at a later period. But in short, Mr. Osaze will have to defend not just this notion, but many other notions. Things like uh, Horus in ancient Egypt was born on December 25th. He will have to, the same time as Christ is supposed to be. He's going to have to defend some issues on the virginity of Isis or Aset, uh, uh, and in its relationship to the Virgin Mary, and lots of other notions of Christianity that Mr. Osaze believes comes from ancient Egypt. So, in my thinking, uh, Christianity came about because of a man named that they called Jesus Christ, and this man had believers, and Christianity was already formed before it came to ancient Egypt by the Hebrews coming into Egypt by Ptolemy Philadelphus, being transported, and those Hebrews connected with a sect of Hebrew culture, which was the Christians, because Christians were Hebrews, and that in the Coptic Christianity, some notions were formed, but Mr. Jabari Osaze will have to show that it was stolen, uh, and instead of other terms that we use in uh, uh, in history, more scientific terms. So I won't go further, but I want to continue on the Tmhw, the Tamahu and the Tmhw. The so we're gonna look real close at this diagram. Now, I believe Champollion made some comments, and I have it sourced from a forum. I just didn't have the time to actually look up what Champollion said, but Champollion said white skin, right? Talking about the Tmhw, or the were a white skin, nose straight or slightly arched, blue eyes, blonde or reddish beard, tall stature and very slender, clad in a hairy ox skin, a veritable savage tattooed on various parts of his body. He is called Tamahu. And so in Methodological, you can see the in between the figures is the Methodological or hieroglyphic name for the Tamahu. So it appears here that Champollion made this description. Breasted didn't cite Champollion, plagiarized that. Dr. York picked it up and continued it. And then Mr. Jabari Osaze is the latest of these people. So it's like the child game where you put the cup in the wax and you talk to someone through that, or you whisper a phrase in one person's ear to another, to another, to another, to another, and then finally the last person gives you what he believes the first person says. Now, if we look at the Methodological, and I do think the Methodological definitions comes from Wallace Budge, um, the person on the Egypt forum, um, he, um, let's just see, I thought I gave him credit, but I did put the site from where it came from. So that's the site there on egyptsearch.com, forums, ultimateb.cgi. Um, this is from his work, and what he is saying that in that this word Tmhw connects to Coptic, and it means the word is probably demej, to be bright. Doesn't mean white, it means be bright. And so he is looking at the words in Methodological and comparing it to the last form of Methodological, which is Coptic, of the people of a later time period of ancient Egypt. And Tamahu in Budge is basically, these are the variations. And Budge says Libyans, and it's Libyans, and it could be a Libyan woman, is one of the variations. And he says Tmhw is a goddess of the Red Land, which is the desert, the deseret. We know it is the desert, but the ancient Egyptians had the black land, which is Kemet, and the red land, or the desert land, the deseret. So that part of it seems right, but the way that the ancient Egyptians are writing their names, the Tmhw and the Tmhw, right? They give them relationships pictorial to their own culture, but they just don't live in Kemet. They live in the outskirts. And then there is Tmhw on the bottom, and when they talk about the people who are the Tmhw, interestingly, they are, you see the mountains, and then you see the word Libyan, but between that, you see a figure that is often used in ancient Egypt to describe the goddess Mat, or the Netert Mat, right? And that should tell you something. And it should have told Mr. Osaze something, that these people, though they live in the desert, the desert, the desert, that they are related to African philosophy and culture. And they are not just foreigners. It should have told him that. And then and then it says that the Tmhw is also a god. The ancient Egyptians, or the people of Tawi, see these people as their neighbors, right? Now, so a big problem with Mr. Osase's spiritual argument and demonizing the Tmhw is that they, again, use and are recognized with the feather of Ma'at. And you see the feather of Ma'at again in the glyphs. So now I have to look real closely at Mr. Jabari's concept of spirituality. Does he actually have, in fact, some access to special information from the ancestors of Africa? I think not, because if he had, then both his intellectual or academic arguments would align to that. I think that these thoughts are just his own. So I'm going to continue. Please bear with me because I'm not just reading from I'm using my slides as talking points, and I am trying to convey to you my ideas, right? And add information as I think about it. Wow. Just make sure this is a yes. Wow. In this particular papyri of Anhai, right, which is a very famous papyrus of a woman in the afterlife, this woman Anhai, and she is being grasped by Horus or Heru, and she is being led to have her feather weighed by Tmhw, with the uh, demon who, if you fail your judgment, you get swallowed and eaten by a moot. And then at the last corner on the left, you see Tahuti, and above Tahuti, which they call Thoth, by the way, in Greek, you see Mat, and she's standing on top with a staff. And you see Mat on one of the scales with the feather in her hair. But the Tamahu people, and the Tmhw people, the Tmhw people, also have feathers. Now, what Mr. Osaze, maybe he never looked at this, but you would notice that Anhai, right, has two feathers on her head like the male counterparts of the Tmhw, the Tamahu. Now, this would say that maybe Mr. Osaze doesn't understand what it is to be an Egyptian. An Egyptian is not a race. The people of Tawi is a civilization that basically had a rule of citizenship. One is to believe in Ma'at, the one with the feather on her head, the ostrich feather, to believe and serve the king, which we call the Nosut Bidi, formerly, you know them as Pharaoh, right? Or ruler, but there were women rulers, right? Like Hatshepsut, like Merenid, like Ahotep, right? Serve the leader and believe in the belief system of the two lands. So that means this civilization could have other groups of Africans in the civilization, including the Tmhw, the Tmhw, the Tmhw, the various groups of the which we call Cushitic, or from Kish, such as the Nahisi, right, the Magi, and that this civilization incorporated many types of Africans. And so the Tmhw is a neighbor of Africa. And we are going to go a little bit further to talk about what we know about the neighbors. So, what he should do and what we should do and what I did was turn to journal articles. We could turn to journal articles, dissertations, to verify things that are out in the public and get people who are experts, who are African, who are European descent, Asian, Arab, etc., American, etc., etc., etc. So, reconsidering the location of Yam by Julian Cooper. He says, I'm going to just read from the top so you can follow. However, framed as a nomadic ethnic group qualified by the throw stick determinative, which in the Old Kingdom is used for the Asiatic Amu. The Tmhw or Tamahu was not a toponym, but these nomads did have a geographical zone of influence in the Tmhw. That's the Delta region, right? The north, the place where Harkuf accompanied the ruler of Yam. Unfortunately, Tmhw or Tmhw in Egyptian text is used in an exceedingly vague manner, and in the Old Kingdom it seems to designate any region west of Upper Egypt and Nubia. Despite this ambiguity in the text, Hope has proposed that the terms Tmhw and Wahat equally refer to the Western Desert inhabitants of shared racial, linguistic, or cultural affinity, but who were topographically distinct based on the dichotomy of sedentarism, oasis dwellers, and semi-nomadism, desert pastoralists. This scenario nearly fits with Harkub's third journey, where en route to Yam, he finds the ruler attacking the Tamahu. That is at some point on the Abu Balis Trail, or further, he found Yamites or tracking Yamites attacking semi-nomadic pastoralists. The same people alluded to as the oasis dwellers, the Wat Tmhw, in Mary's description. While most have seen this episode as Yamite foray from the Nile to attack nomads in the Western Desert, there are no specific details on where this action took place, and the relationship of the Yamites to the Tmhw or Tamahu must remain an open question. In the letter of Pepi II to Harkuf, the king refers to the region where Harkuf obtained a pygmy as the Ta'ahtiu, land of the horizon dwellers. Like the corner of heaven, such a geographical phrase is rarely outside overtly religious literature. As Godek mentioned, the Egyptian expressions of Atu, horizon dwellers, usually refers to the eastern and western horizons, not the south or the north. The text suggests in circular terms that Yam and the Ta'atu are one of the same locations, meaning the east and the west of Nile Valley civilizations, right? The east and the west as being a corner of the heaven or land of the horizon dwellers. That's all that they are. They're on the outskirts and borders of what is considered the borders of Tawi, the two lands. Now, there is the Methodological, and they have many of these terms, and the translation is, the speech of this your letter was noted, which you composed for the king at the palace, in order to cause that one may know that you have descended in peace from Yam with the army which was with you. You said in this letter of yours that you bought every great and good produce. You said in this letter of yours that you made bought a dancing pygmy of the god from the land of the horizon dwellers. Interesting. So the people that they're calling the pygmy or the Twa, or in ancient Egypt, the dog, right? The DNG, right, are um, Africans also outside the uh, corners of heaven as a horizon dweller. And at this time period, you would find people that, with the pejorative name pygmy, we call them Twa. The ancient Egypts called them the Deng, the DNG, the Deng, right? That and this African was also brought into the civilization, and the civilization of ancient Egypt has um, venerated the the what is called the Twa, um, and and they venerate it so much that there is a netter or a divine called Bes, which is a deity of magic, a protective childbirth, a very wise person, short in stature, right, of an old African look, a more prehistoric look. So, getting back to Mr. Osaze and scholarship, we see that the uh, people of Tawi may have had skirts with people that they disagree in the western and eastern desert. Um, that these group were migrating, and so we can see from the map again on the left side, the Tmhw was on the western desert, and they are connected to very important sites of ancient Egypt, including Abju and Tennis, that are right on the outskirts of them. And uh, then we know that there are other groups, the Magi, other groups of Kish, and this is on top of Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt is at the bottom, and so I didn't include that map, but maybe I'll just show it real quick. That their civilizations and cultures was just outside of the Nile Valley. So where do you get the notion of these are the Tmhw are Europeans or white or European or not African or something that you want to put a negative term on? Well, when you do that, then what you become is what we call an Egyptomaniac, meaning nothing else is important except Egypt, which you call Kemet or Tawi. But in the cultures of this people, that is so far from the truth. So I'm doing this video so that you can do your own research and hopefully not be exposed to a virus given from someone with spiritual abilities and a degree from a important institution, that you won't begin to uh, succumb to of the virus of misinformation. Now, let's just go back and let's look at another source. Oh, okay. A very important source is a journal article that I got from JSTOR, just like I got the other one from, on Hathor or Hawat returns to Medemud. Medemud. Now, why is this important? Well, for an advanced study, there's a festival honoring Hawat as old as the 13th dynasty. And in this festival, they included all of the African neighbors. except the Amu, who they separated themselves from, right? But they saw them as invaders to Africa, right? These are the Amorites and the Mesopotamian groups of people, but not the people necessarily who were mixed groups living in Africa, who again in the civilization of Tawi, all you had to do was follow Ma'at, which is their divine law, serve their king, right? And respect the people and the civilizations called of the people of the two lands. Follow their rules, which is Ma'at. We'll talk about that in the second video. Follow the king, right? The king's rule, right? Their laws of their rulers, right? And then their laws of Ma'at lay out their relationships to other people, right? And that is primarily what you had to be if you were going to be a citizen, a remet, right, of that land. Now, let's read a little bit about this festival. So this festival included all of the African neighbors, including the Pontites, the people of Pont. It included the people of the Western Desert, and included Nubia, included the citizens in ancient Egypt, and they were all invited. So let's just listen to a little description of it. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just be a little bit more clear. So it included the Tmhw, and it included the Tmhw. Right. On the interior west wall of the central kiosk at the entrance of the temple of Medamud, there was carved a hymn to the gold, the goddess Ratawi as Hathor, Hawat Hor in ancient Egypt transliterations, the returning eye of the sun. This hymn to Hathor, the gold, has been translated in whole and in part in several publications, but has received only minimal commentary. The various translations show that the widest diversion from each other in one of the most interesting portions of the text, column 7 to 10, which described the merry company escorted the goddess back into Egypt. The Mamadou hymn was perhaps inspired by the program to the festival mentioned in the myth of the solar eye, the celebration at Thebes in honor of the returning goddess, on her way back to Memphis after her sojourn in the far southeast. The festival activities described in the Medamud hymn or perhaps as old as the 13th dynasty, then a part of the festival of Montu mentioned in the Bolak Papyrus 18. As recorded in the late hymn from Medamud, the festival was probably a description of a portion of the festival inebriation Thai of It. Uh, the hymn is addressed Aket. I think that's Aket. Aket. The hymn is addressed to Hathor as the returning eye of the sun and describes a festival well suited to the context of the celebration of the new year. The reverse world appropriate to the return of the goddess, her marriage, and the birth of her son in the swampy landscape. The imagery of the hymn is that of the far southeast, the area of the dawn. So we know from here that there is a festival to Hathor. She is returning from the south. They don't want to say Nubia. They don't want to say Cush, but the goddess goes to the southeast, deep into Africa. And she does this as the returning eye of the sun. And so she leaves, and there are other uh, stories, like from, let's say, any Herod Honoris, where he is asked to go and bring the lioness, in this in the zoomorphic form of a Hathor or Hawathor, back into Egypt, right? The hunter in any Herod, uh, Honoris, is his other Greek type name. And so there are these stories of the the goddess, or the female principal, leaving Egypt and going deep into Africa, and then returning. Uh, and these are fascinating concepts because they talk about trans-regional Nile Valley relationships. Okay, now, okay, so um, for even deeper research, there's a footnote on detailed relationships between Nubians and the Tamahu, for they are in the same regions, and it is in here on the early contacts between the Tamahu and Nubians. C. B. P. Behrens, C. Group, Sprach, um, and I don't read German, but there is a whole paper on the relationships between the Tamahu and the Nubians, as we would expect from the map, right? This relationship, and that we can see from the tattoos and the side lock, that these people are related, having different cultures, sharing concepts that they all got from their parent peoples, uh, which came from the Green Sahara when the Nile was not able to be uh, inhabited, and that these all of these concepts are old concepts that go to all the peoples of the Nile Valley and their eastern and western sections. So, getting back to this, and let me just close. So I want to do a part two. I just want to get for our people this notion of Tmhw from the Kemetic high priest Jabari Osaze, to have at least one video out there that says that what he says is dubious. And so here is the part of the conversation of that I will be dealing with in part two, where my brother Sa Netta, who runs Black News 102 Sa Netta Studios, is excited because he's able to talk to brother Jabari. I mean, sorry, Mr. Osaze, Jabari Osaze, and brother Reggie. Now, I'm calling him Mr. Jabari Osaze because he said in that video he can no longer call me his brother. Not that I talked about him personally, not that I disrespected him personally, but because I challenge his information and he considers me dressing him down. Well, I'm not trying to dress you down, but what I am going to do is challenge notions like Tmhw, where your use of it hurts our people intellectually, academically, socially, and culturally, because there are people who really want to study Africa, who are getting degrees, who have to pay enormous amount of money to be educators in Black studies and Africana studies and other studies, and you have this notion of Tmhw hanging out that will hurt them to make their degrees worthless. Because if they said Tmhw as you propose, you render their degrees worthless. It would be better that you would have sourced where you got the term from, did the work, wrote a paper on it, right, and defended it instead of putting it out on YouTube where young people could, in fact, begin to use this amongst the other things that you do, meaning that you are a priest and you train people to be priests and priestesses and in your spiritual uh, uh, organization, but you use this publicly, and I am very concerned that our young people and these and the community in the YouTube uses terms that are not sourced. So all I simply tried to do was not disrespect you. I need not disrespect you, but say that the information that you have put out is one, false, incorrect, pseudo, and it could be bordering on plagiarism because you have never, ever, ever, ever sourced where you got it from and really why you use it. So, since we are in dispute about information, not personal, because we don't have a relationship outside of this, we don't, right? We are in dispute for intellectual reasons, and I know your supporters and your friends and all those people that support you and follow you will be upset, but I think it's for the better. Now again, my brother Sanetta, he is the master of debates and master of these discussions, and I don't get upset with him because lots of times what it is just getting the people excited and promotion. I don't take it to heart, but I do take to heart when you attempt to, as you did in the video that I will show in the second video, where you attempted to belittle my scholarship and say that I was wrong and say that you are not a priest of the Meduneta. Spoiler alert. If you're not a priest of the words of God, then what are you a priest of? What the hell are you a priest of if you are not a priest of the Medu Neter? Because the Medu Neter gives you access to the spiritual beliefs that you claim to have. And you said, that's right. Let's just say I am not a priest of the Medu Neter, basically laughed at me and and said, let's move on. Well, I'm not willing to move on an intellectual point. We all this brother stuff. I'm gonna deal with it on the second video. But spoiler alert: I was never just your brother. I was in Egypt in 1987. I don't know if you was in middle school or you was in junior high school, right? I was never just your brother. I have been doing the work. If anything, I was your big brother. But if you look at our images, me on the bottom and you up on the top, we look similar in age. That is not the fact. We are not similar in age. We're not similar in experience. I do think that you are a bright, well spoken person. But on this subject, you're not in your league. The only way that you can fix it is if you show, and you're going to have to do some specific examples. First, you're going to have to render a sincere apology to the people for being so limited in your information uh, about the Tmhw. And then you are going to have to come back and do a presentation on why you call non-African people Tmhw, and the Tmhw are in fact African people. But you know, you said it a million times. I make very bad arguments. Well, to you, but the Tmhw, the Tmhw, those people are in fact Africans. So why are you calling people who are non-Africans the Tmhw? You're gonna have to go back and listen. Um, you know, you want to debate Dr. Richard Carrier, right? You call him a Tmhw. How's Dr. Richard Carrier a Tmhw? Now I feel bad because I actually defended you on one of the videos where I thought that Dr. Richard Carrier was singling out you and your organization. And I thought that that was wrong because he didn't mention uh, the non-African or the European descent organizations that practice the uh, Kemetic spirituality, and he just singled you out. And so I thought that was wrong, and so I uh, def- uh, attempted to defend you in the context of Dr. Richard Carrier's uh, what I thought was wrong. If he had just mentioned the Kemetic Orthodoxy group, I wouldn't I wouldn't have I wouldn't have weighed in on it, the matter itself. But because he singled you out, and then there are people who are interested in the spiritual traditions of ancient Egypt, both for what they call spiritual reasons and for academic reasons, I thought that I would defend you. Um, and so, but you have never defended me when my brother Sonetta has said the things that he has said about me. You basically hid behind it, right? And there's several other cases uh, where I had problems when, for example, Zion Lex was who is a, a Hebrew um, and was attempting to read the Methodological, and you said it was wrong, and I sensed the fact that Zion Lex was at least trying to read it and was making mistakes, but you didn't get up and demonstrate your expertise on it. So in part two, we are going to deal with some of those issues based on uh, what Brother Sanetta has brought to us in being able to question. We're going to bring up the issue of you're not a priest of the Methodological, so then what the hell are you? If you're not the priest of the words of God, it's just very limited. You think the Methodological is just a script. We're just going to deal with the fact that you think that there's a difference between hieratic and Methodological, and Methodological is the formal, the hieratic is the script. Both of them are the Methodological. It's no difference, right? But the fact of the matter is that the Methodological is the more formal written language of the ancient Egyptians, and we're going to deal with that. And we're going to deal with some other points. So everybody else, look out for part two. Now, um, this is taking me a little time out of my life. I am going to put my Cash App. If anybody's interested in donating to me, I would appreciate it. I lose a lot of time um, trying to walk back things in our communities, in our communities that I think that are wrong. I have more than 8 years in public doing this type of work, and it bleeds on my own time and my own finances. So my Cash App is, I will put the URL, and if you're interested, and write your comments. I will delete any comments that's saying I'm just hateful and I'm jealous if you don't say, if you don't show where he is right. So if you don't comment with an argument that he is right based on the material, then of course I would consider that just being upset with me for dealing with the false information, what I deem as the false information that Mr. Jabari Osaze has been putting forth. Because I don't want our people attacked as blackologists and called Afrocentrists and other things to take away from the need to examine the work. So with that said, please look out for part 2. And my name is Brother Reggie, and it's a pleasure to serve our populations that are interested in these subjects. Peace.
I am not a priest of the Methodological. So you're right. I'm not a priest of the Methodological. So you're right, Reggie. Let's just say I'm not a priest of the Methodological. I never said I was a priest of the Methodological. I am a Kemetic high priest. You're welcome.